The station at dusk wore the look of a place forgotten. Its timbers sagged beneath years of weather, the air thick with the smell of old smoke and horse sweat. The last train had already rumbled away, dragging with it a cloud of cinders that hung over the tracks like a fading memory. Dust curled across the boards in tired spirals, carried by a restless wind. Morgan Holt stood by a post, hat brim drawn low, boots planted wide as though he feared the earth might shift beneath him if he moved too soon. His figure was tall, handsome in a rugged way, but the years of solitude weighed heavier than the pistol at his hip. He looked not at the empty tracks but into the distance, as though searching for something that had yet to reveal itself. What kind of man waits when there is no train left to board? Across the platform, Talisa Moonwater stood in silence. The shawl around her shoulders was worn thin, its fringe frayed, yet she held it with the dignity of a queen clutching her crown. Her dark hair spilled free, unpinned, a river against her back. She did not shift when the wind pressed against her, nor when the cold bit at her skin. Her stillness was not born of comfort but of discipline, the kind one learns when life has already taken too much. She was 23, though her widowhood carved her face with the gravity of someone older. She looked at nothing, and in that gaze at nothing she looked at everything. What silence had taught her to stand so still? Morgan noticed her long before she noticed him. It was not her beauty, though there was that, it was the way her solitude mirrored his own. Two strangers, separated by distance, yet marked by the same shadow. He felt a strange ache, an awareness that his own loneliness might not be entirely his to bear. The thought frightened him more than the barrel of any gun. Could another person carry even a fraction of his silence? The sky gave no warning before the rain began. Fat drops struck the platform, darkening the wood like ink stains spreading across parchment. Talisa stepped forward at last, seeking the awning's shelter. Morgan, already beneath it, shifted aside and motioned with the smallest tilt of his hand. He spoke no word, offered no smile, only a gesture. For a moment, suspicion hardened her eyes. But the rain fell harder and she accepted. They stood together, inches apart, yet bound by the drumming of water overhead. What if storms were meant to push strangers together? The silence stretched. Morgan found himself staring at her hands. They were strong, scarred, with the marks of labor etched into her skin. She clutched her shawl as though it were the last fragile thread tying her to the life she once knew. He wondered what tasks had demanded such resilience, what grief those hands had clung to until the nails bent. His chest ached, not from want but from recognition. He thought of his own hands, scarred from rope burns and rough with calluses, hands that had built nothing lasting, hands that had never held another long enough to matter. Could two broken grips fit together and still hold strong? Bootsteps rang across the platform. Sheriff Clay Mercer's shadow stretched long in the rain. His voice carried like a whip. "Holt," he called, his eyes narrowing at the sight of them. "Best watch yourself. That woman ain't for you. Sorrow follows her, and you've got enough of your own." Talisa flinched, her shoulders drawing tighter, as though shame had just been thrown across her like a cloak. Morgan's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Martha Lee, the innkeeper, leaned from her porch, whispering into a traveler's ear. Her smile was thin, sharp as the edge of a blade. Judgment pooled in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Yet still, neither Morgan nor Talisa moved away. When the world branded them outcasts, why did they not scatter apart? The storm thickened. Without thought, Morgan shrugged free of his coat and draped it across Talisa's shoulders. She lifted her hand, meaning to give it back, but he shook his head gently. "Keep it," he murmured, his voice rough as gravel yet soft as prayer. "You need it more." The weight of the coat startled her, not for its warmth but for the intimacy it carried. For a moment her eyes glistened, though she did not weep. She had learned long ago not to give her sorrow to anyone. But now, for the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a widow, not as an exile, but as a woman whose presence still mattered. Could kindness ever be more dangerous than cruelty? They did not move when the rain slowed to a mist. Instead, they stayed beneath the awning as if bound there by an unseen thread. The silence had changed. It no longer pressed heavy with emptiness but hummed with the possibility of something fragile. Morgan's throat worked. He swallowed hard before words broke free. "I need a wife," he said, each syllable jagged as though pulled from a deep wound. "And you need shelter." The bluntness of the statement cut the air, harsh and raw. Yet beneath it lived something tender, an offering, not a demand. Talisa turned her eyes to him, searching his face, his hands, his trembling breath. He looked like a man terrified of rejection, not because he feared being alone, but because he had dared to hope. What if his words were not transaction but confession? She said nothing. She did not leave. That silence became its own answer. Morning came bright and merciless. The town gathered, eager to watch scandal unfold. Men leaned on railings, women whispered behind gloved hands, children gawked with the bluntness of youth. They expected shame, failure, rejection. Instead, Morgan Holt stood tall, Talisa Moonwater at his side. His hand closed around hers, not with possession but with steadiness. Sheriff Mercer's stare burned into him, but Morgan's voice rang clear across the square. "Will you stand with me?" he asked her, his voice both plea and promise, "not for this day alone but for all our days?" The hush that followed was thick enough to cut. Talisa's chin lifted, her spine lengthened. No longer bowed by whispers, she answered in a voice that trembled yet carried strength. "Yes." The word was small but it was unbreakable. The crowd murmured, scandal evaporating into disbelief. Judgment wilted before the dignity of their choice. What cruelty could stand against such quiet defiance? Two people once marked as broken now stood as whole, not because the world had welcomed them, but because they had chosen each other in spite of it. Was there any power greater than two outcasts finding home in one another? They left the station together, the horizon spilling open in waves of golden light. The horse moved steady beneath them, the sound of hooves blending with the hum of the morning. Talisa leaned, just slightly, her head resting against Morgan's shoulder. It was a gesture small, almost invisible, yet more binding than a written vow. Their silence now carried a new weight, not loneliness but shelter. The land before them stretched vast and merciless, promising hardship, hunger, storms and long nights without comfort. Yet the open plains also promised freedom. For Morgan, every mile would be less heavy because her presence filled the hollow spaces in him. For Talisa, every dawn would be less cruel because his steadiness wrapped around her like a shield. Together they would face judgment, isolation, and the grinding cruelty of the frontier. And still they would endure. Wasn't endurance itself a kind of love? Perhaps love begins not in thunder, nor in declarations shouted across a crowd, but in small acts that bloom into devotion. A seat offered in the rain, a coat upon chilled shoulders, a trembling hand that does not let go. And so, if ever you find yourself burdened by the silence of loneliness, remember this. The world may speak your name with scorn, may close its doors and cast its stares, but somewhere waits a soul who will see you whole. Loneliness is not the proof of unworthiness. It is only the pause before recognition, the silence before shelter, the stillness before a life begins again.